audition was over, the director came up to me. He said, "So why did you do the character in a Southern accent?" I said, "Well, I thought he was from the South." He said, No. He's from Yonkers." Oh my God.
Welcome to Casting Actors Cast, insights for actors on acting in the business of show. Casting director Jeffrey Dreisbach takes you behind the scenes and reveals secrets to a successful acting career. You can find out more on the web at castingactorscast.com. Please enjoy, like, and share Casting Actors Cast. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Dreisbach.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Casting Actors Cast. I'm Jeffrey Dreisbach. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing? Gosh, I hope you're having a good day. I'm having a pretty cool day today. Things are a lot better this week, so I'm happy to report that I'm still alive to tell the tale. And thank you for joining us today. Today's episode is bank records. Now, I know that sounds like it's very dry and it's like sounding like I'm going to talk about accounting, but guess what? I am not going to talk about accounting. I'm going to explain exactly what I mean in just a second. I just want to say thank you to those who are regular listeners to Casting Actors Cast. I receive quite a bit of mail and it's really awesome. I love doing these podcasts, and I think what's happening is that these podcasts are kind of becoming more and more interesting for me because I have responses from you. So do me a great big favor if you would you? Because these podcasts are free. They're only 20 minutes once a week, every Thursday. Please pass it along. Please let somebody know that we're here and listening, and would love to grow the community of listeners to Casting Actors Cast. Also, if you have an opportunity to go to castingactorscast.com, you'll find some past episodes of Casting Actors Cast, so catch up on some of those episodes. Earlier episodes are really much more hands-on, practical application stuff like pictures and resumes and how to get an agent, and there's a whole wealth, I think, of podcasts early on that you might not have thought of. So please feel free to play catch-up by going to castingactorscast.com. And I'm also running a kind of a cool little special. I kind of think like I'm the Kmart of podcasters, I guess. But if you go to Casting Actors Cast and you go to the area on the form that says jump into the talent pool, fill out that form, it'll open up a hyperlink to a free, yes, I did say free book called Conversation Pieces Out of the Studio, the voiceover workshop for professional actors. And this is a book that I wrote a few years back. Because of the many colleges and universities that I do work with, I would travel out and do an entire week's worth of training on being a professional voice actor, because that was part of my background. And this book was as a result of that. So I've decided I'm just now going to give it away free of charge for those of you who want to download a PDF. It's 100 pages. I think it's really practical, hands-on, good information, so consider that. All just for filling out the form, just so I get a sense of who's out there, who's listening. You can make whatever comments that you want, and that's how I've heard from several people over the past week regarding previous episodes of Casting Actors Cast. I wanted to address a question that I did receive from Sean Quigley, an actor in New York. And Sean was kind enough to let me mention his name on the podcast, and I thought this was a really interesting question. So let's get this question out of the way first, and I'm happy to answer it. But here's his email. I would be very interested to hear advice in a podcast about whether in an audition, an actor should use their own accent as a default if it is not specifically mentioned in the breakdown, but you perhaps feel as a performer it would work best in a dialect other than your own. I'm a British actor in NYC, and even though I use my own RP voice in most occasions, and despite indicating it on my resume, I sometimes leave the room worrying that I may have harmed their casting perception of me just by the very act of me being British, and sometimes wonder if it would help broaden my casting consideration if I went in with a standard American my accent work is solid and have a good ear. Thank you so very much, Sean. Sean did the right thing. He went to Casting Actors Cast and asked a question. So here's going to be my response to that question. First of all, I think it's an excellent question. I believe very strongly that if there is no mention of an accent in the audition, bringing in your own accent is perfectly acceptable. I don't think it's a disqualifying thing. But here's something I would like you, though, Sean, to consider. And that is, if you have a really good, strong American, and it happens to be an American playwright or a script written by an American and not specifically from Great Britain, then my suggestion is that when you walk into the room, you introduce yourself as you would normally introduce yourself and let your British accent be what it is. Of course, you don't think of it as an accent, I'm sure. But I guess my saying is, let me see as many colors as I can in the audition environment. So if you walk in and you say, hello, I'm Sean Quigley, and it's a delight to be here today and I'd like to audition for you. Okay, you can tell me how good my accent was now. But then you do the audition in your fantastically well rendition of an American, then I think that shows more colors and kind of broadens your range. And I also think it's quite impressive. I think it's much easier for American actors to sound British, and there are a lot of terrible British accents out there, perhaps even including my own. But I do think that the more opportunity to show me as your variety and skill set, I think the better. And finally, Sean, I would say that if the decision to use an accent, whether it's your American or just to simply sound the way you sound, if it adds to the character interpretation, then by all means, that would be the better choice. If it takes away from your interpretation by adding an additional color or layer that's not necessarily important to the character or necessarily important to the play itself, that might be a detraction. That might actually take away from what your good audition would show. Very quickly, I'd like to share with you the difference between dialects, accents, and regionalisms. First of all, dialects literally meaning that you're from a former country speaking English. And so therefore, dialect has to do with the words that you use. So the words themselves sound slightly different because of your work at trying to sound English or American. Then therefore, it's within the words that we hear a dialect. Now, accent is different because it has to do with the sounds that you are making. Your conditioning in another language based on the sounds are what give you the accent. And finally, regionalism is very locale specific. For example, I know that if Sean were from the north of England, for example, he would sound slightly different than if he were a Londoner. Just as anyone from New Hampshire have different regionalisms than if you would have from, let's say, Georgia. So that is region specific. So I hope that kind of breaks it down a little bit, especially if you get a breakdown that talks about having a foreign accent or having a dialect. Perhaps you need to consider words versus sounds versus locale. So thanks very much for that, Sean. I hope that helps and answers your question and really appreciate that. And please feel free for any of you to write in a question if you have one. I'm happy to respond. So continuing on this theme a little bit, and the reason I'm calling this bank records is that I was going through our storage room. My wife and I sold our house up in Massachusetts, and we moved into a larger kind of 2-bedroom condominium. It's really kind of nice. It overlooks the city. We really feel so grateful that we've had the opportunity to enjoy that house in Massachusetts for about 20 years, and then we sold it. But we accumulated so much stuff. We accumulated just tons of additional stuff, and we didn't know what to do with. And yes, we had garage sales, and we gave stuff away, and we sent stuff to family, and we did. That was just my laptop just kind of slipped and fell there. My studio's getting cramped. So what we did was we ended up going and part of this condominium complex has storage rooms, so we have these huge storage rooms. But, we just haven't had time to deal with the boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff we've accumulated. So yesterday was my day to kind of go through the storage room and clean up as much as I can, and it was just really difficult work. One of the things that made it really difficult was that I started opening up these boxes, and I found a whole bunch of yearly diaries. Not necessarily calendars, but they were calendars, but they had full pages of each day of the year. So it was a 365-day book, literally, that you could write your diary or you could make notes, but it was every day there was something to write. And I started collecting these every year. And I'm not going to tell you when I started, but they ended up all the way into 1994, I think. And so I had a bunch of these books that I had accumulated, and I was thumbing through them, which is something that you shouldn't do, cleaning up your space, only because I started reading some of the entries in the book. And there was a brief period of time when I had left one university before going to another. I had a chance to study in England with Roger Williams College students to do a semester in London. And that, for me, at age 20, was a really, really exciting and wonderful experience. And I worked with the incredible James Roose Evans, who wrote the book on experimental theater, and saw so many productions and really immersed myself in what it was to be an actor in the United Kingdom. And I auditioned for movies and took tap dance classes and studied. It was really an immersive and very lovely, lovely time. And also, I had one of these books with me, and every day I wrote an entire page of what happened to me that day, sort of a diary. Looking back at some of the entries, it was just kind of an amazing thing because it was very emotional, and I talked about my feelings, and I really went over, everything that I did almost moment by moment. It was pretty crazy, and I had actually forgotten that I had that much discipline in my 20s to be able to do those kinds of entries. Now, when I got back to finishing and getting my BFA degree and then moving to New York and started to act, I kept these diaries for appointments. So every appointment I ever had, every booking, how much I made, and details about each of those opportunities were put into these books. So this is kind of a long-winded way of me sharing with you the importance of banking your records, keeping an accurate account of your work as an actor. And I've said this before, but you are the CEO of your own career. You have the artistic and creative side, but you also must, and I really emphasize this, must keep really strong, accurate records of your work as an actor. Not only for the logistical, hands-on, practical application of things like taxes and staying busy and keeping yourself focused and disciplined, but really keeping a record of every audition that you have is going to be so helpful. And here's why. Reason number one is that if you get a call back, and let's say you have several auditions during the course of a week, if you're lucky enough to have 3 or 4 auditions, then they could be a commercial and then a theater and maybe a television show, blah, blah, blah. You keeping records of every opportunity will help you, especially if you get a call back. What did you do in that original audition that got you the call back? So keeping a record of that is going to be so helpful to you. Plus, I also think it's a great thing to have a record of your past experiences to help give you an overview of which direction your career is going and give you a sense of where you are in the world as an actor. So I just love the idea of one example would be 3x5 cards. I know it sounds so antiquated, doesn't it? You could use your computer, of course, or your cell phone, whatever, but maybe this is just too old school. And I'm sorry about that. I'm sounding so old. But just keeping an index card, those 3x5 cards, those little cardboard cards, with lines on them. If you just if you just wrote down the date, the time, who you met, what was the name of the project, maybe some notes on the character that you played, or maybe notes on what took place during the audition, whether it was feedback, something that the director did to give you an adjustment, to make something else happen in the room. Any of those kinds of notations for every audition. It sounds kind of tedious to keep those kinds of records, but that is something you can, and here, wait for it, that's something you can bank on. That's something that you can keep and that you can refer to whether you have a callback or for other auditions with similar characters that you might be playing. So I'm a big fan of 3x5 cards. If that isn't appealing to you, then consider calendar. We keep a calendar at McCorkle Casting, and it's a huge Google calendar for every project that we're working on and other bookings that each of us in the office have. And I actually have it on a great big television monitor so that when we go to the main office, you can see all of the projects and we can have a big kind of overview. And what I love about that is that you can make whatever notations you need to. So keeping a good solid calendar, whether you use Google Calendar or whether you use iCal, if you're an Apple fan, then those are really great as well. As long, and this is important, as long as you keep accurate records in a consistent way. In other words, you must stick with it. You don't get lazy. Once you start, stick to the project. The other thing that you could use if you'd like is a diary. Similar to the book that I have, you can buy one of those daily diaries, or you could print, something out of your printer at home. Or you could use a spreadsheet, use an Excel spreadsheet and have categories for each of those things that I talked about. And I'm going to repeat those now. So you want to put the date in, so you can keep a chronological order of this. Maybe the time of day. Sometimes the time of day can really affect the way in which you approach work. For example, you're probably not going to be in your best voice if you're a singer if you have the 9 a.m. or 9:30 a.m. appointment. Conversely, if you're too tired at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon because of whatever, your life, then you may want to make a notation of that your emotional contribution to what your work is about might be time sensitive. So be cognizant. Ooh, good word. Gosh, I didn't think I would have one today. Keep yourself cognizant of where you are in an emotional track during the course of your day, and that might help shape and define the kinds of audition times that are going to be best for you. Now, who did you meet in the room? What was the director's name? Who was the casting director? Actors are, and forgive me for saying this, but many times I find actors are very self-absorbed. And this isn't a criticism. This is just kind of my reality, because I was there so absorbed in wanting to do a good job and so absorbed into being in the room and being as focused as I could be that I oftentimes never even bothered to find out who was in the room. I learned my lesson big time, many times over. So what was the name of the project? Give me the name of the character that you're playing and some notes on the character. What did you find? If you had the chance to read the whole script, then by all means you want to jot down some character things that might be helpful, sort of jogging your memory. And this would take place before or after the actual audition. And then notes on the audition itself. What took place in the room? Where were you? What things did you think worked really, really well? What things didn't work really, really well? So those can all be factors that you put on your spreadsheet or your diary or your calendar or your 3x5 card, but by all means, really think about how you're keeping accurate records of your work. Again, I want to repeat that I know this may seem tedious, this may seem boring, this may seem like a waste of time, but I can share with you based on the calendars and in the books that I did over those 15 years of work in New York. It was absolutely awesome to be able to have those kinds of notations to reflect back on who I was and how I grew as an actor. Now, the bottom line for me, I decided while cleaning out the storage room to throw those calendars away. I threw all of those books away. I decided that I didn't want to live in the past, and it really didn't serve me with who I was now. But that was still a really hard decision to throw those away. I had some vision of me being very, very famous one day and that this would go into the Jeffrey Dreisbach archives somewhere at the Smithsonian. Yeah, maybe my ego is just a little too big there. But anyway, I did throw those away in order to look ahead, not back. And I would like to encourage you to keep those kind of accurate records, to keep looking at ways in which you can put a structure in your creative life so that it'll free up your creativity. I believe that that's absolutely what happens if you do that. So I hope you had a good time today. Look at where the time went. It's time to go. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you join us again for our next podcast, Casting Actors Cast. I'm Jeffrey Dreisbach.
You've been listening to Casting Actors Cast with host Jeffrey Dreisbach. Find out more at castingactorscast.com and let us know if you would like us to cover topics you're interested in. Thanks for listening. I'm Matthew DeSarno.